By the 30th day of blockade, Halcyon Station stopped counting in days and surrendered to minutes, because minutes could be held in the hand and shaken when they misbehaved. The relief board above, operations flickered through them with an indifference that felt like mercy compared to the Kither cruisers outside. 8 crescents at perfect spacing, a necklace around a throat that had learned not to swallow too loudly. The envoy's hourly broadcasts arrived on schedule with the same velvet threat wrapped in. Grammar surrender gravity and governance. Open docs to inspection. Accept benevolent administration, in the same closing line spoken as if the stars themselves had authored it. Your warship will not arrive. The refugees in the conversion girders called the voice the lullaby, not because it soothed, but because it learned to live next to sleep. Rhea Solace, acting commander by endurance rather than desire, kept the speakers low and the oxygen high and the rumors very slightly alive. On paper, Halcyon could not break a blockade. It could starve less creatively than most and sell its dignity slower. On paper, the fuel projected to a forgiveness date, the med stocks folded into a pie chart, and the mathematical comfort of acceptable losses squared itself like a table set for a bad dinner. Rhea had stopped reading the paper. She read vents and schedules, the way a ring's flex would complain under tug traffic, the way the maintenance chief's jokes lost adjectives when stress tightened the bolts in her lungs, the way a child staring out a view slot would pick a star and try to bully hope into it. That child, Len, stowaway promoted to morale consultant by the end of week 1, had asked yesterday if stars took sides. Stars are indifferent, Kenji from maintenance had said, tightening a clamp that did not require tightening. Humans keep promises. Len had asked if that was the same thing. Close enough, Angie had said, then brought him a ration cookie too early for the schedule, a treason that the vents failed to report. Sensors found ghosts often. Agitation makes good noise. At 219 Station Mean, the thermal cameras wrote 1, a bloom over moonlit Theda's shadow that looked like a shrug in the mathematics. Too clean for debris friction. Too brief for a patrol flip. Too petty for a god. Log is spurious, Rhea said, because naming a ghost invites it to dinner. At 3:04, Dock 12 accepted a freighter with a patchwork hull that leaked rumors. Its captain swore on everything a captain has left that a stealth ship had kissed his wake 2 days back, dark as an apology and twice as dangerous. Name? Rhea asked, and watched his eyes decide between myth and breath. Vesper, he said quietly, like he was worried about waking something that preferred sleeping cold. No transponder. But when she burned, the blue said home. Between 3:50 and 4:10, Halcyon rehearsed evacuation lies and rescue truths. A triage team turned inventiveness into therapy. The kitchens invented inventiveness out of textured plant protein and courage. And Combs downloaded another legal advisory on humane surrender and filed it under This Is Not a Planet. Rhea stood a minute in Bay 5, where the old shuttle's skin had been patched so many times it had become a quilt, and traced with a gloved finger the names the hull kept. Pilots who had taught that ship how to forgive errors and punish arrogance. We will go when we are told, she told the ship, which is to say herself, and only then. At 4:11, physics made a promise. The dark limb of Theta coughed light in 3 narrow plumes that refused to flare. The contact painted on tactical as wrong mass too large for the heat, signature too inconsistent for commerce, vector too honest for a liar. Kither tracking lied politely, and then had to apologize to itself as the things skated their ring's geometry, exactly one solution outside their best guess. Thermal bloom again, sensors said, a voice trembling its way toward hope. No, Rhea said, letting her own voice pretend calm so the room could borrow some. That's an engine saying sorry for being late. The name rolled onto the overlay without etiquette, hull number like a punchline, TSS Vesper. It should have been classified. It should have been destroyed 2 wars ago. It should not have been here. Rhea did not have the leisure to categorize should. Kither doctrine respects the hour. Vesper arrived between them like a disrespectful minute. Cruiser Beta 3 broke formation with the fury of a dancer whose partner missed a step. Point defense stitched light across the dark in a pattern Kither admirals call correction and human. Tacticians save under hubris presents as geometry. Vesper answered in a language Halcyon had not heard in a generation. She did not flare. She erased. She took the space where tracking solutions had planned to be and made it wrong. Mass light mismatch. Sensors whispered, awed and afraid. Phantom manifold doing something unkind to thermal paint. In another room, OODs who had studied rumors under blankets scribbled unpublishable marginalia about heat sinks and radiant edge geometries. On the operations floor, Rhea invested in the discipline of not grinning. Tight beam, Com said, breath hitching. Bandwidth like a needle. The line the station's original architects had installed for romance and treason vibrated in Rhea's palm. Halcyon, the voice said, steady as a metronome. Vesper, apologies. Physics delayed us. Politics tried. Status? Rhea introduced herself to the voice as if to a neighbor leaning over a fence in a storm. Hungry, angry, functional. Adequate, the voice said. We can make you a window. Duration 3 minutes 12. Then the ring closes like a mouth. Can you move? Rhea looked at the relief board's tick. Halcyon had degrees in minutes. We can move, she said. We will not be elegant. Elegance is a peacetime affordance, Vesper said. On my mark. Vesper lit once like a rude idea, then went dark, then appeared where her heat could not have been if God had respected the Kither. Cruiser Beta 3 committed a murder on its own solution-slewed shield edge into the debris lane. Halcyon's tugs had decorated over weeks with small, impolite gifts whose signatures pretended to be coolant until someone attempted to be a hero. The first detonation was embarrassment. The second suggested a theme. The third stitched a gap in the blockade large enough to argue with. Dock 9, open, Rhea said. Medical, launch the barge. Tugs, every spine you have. Freighters with fuel, sprint. Under her words, the station moved away. Rehearsal makes possible. Valves obeyed. Rails held hands. Children played a game called How Long Can We Hold Our Breath? And Angie ran with a coil of line like she intended to lasso a cruiser. The Kither envoy missed his hourly and tried to compensate with dignity. His cruisers folded in like a curtain after a bad act. Vesper misbehaved at exactly the frequency that makes tracking officers throw their heads back and reconsider career choices. Human phantom tactics, someone said on an unsecured Kither net in a tone that thought it was contempt and was learning awe. Rhea's board bled ships through the bite. First the medical barge, ugly and necessary. Then the oxygen tankers, sleek with purpose. Then the quilted shuttle that had learned forgiveness. A tug called Bright Sparrow dragged a freighter called Austerity, allegedly with a joke only dockhands laugh at under fire. Vesper sent a single burst command, curse, blessing, no one could tell which. And a spinous debris raft chose that moment to become art against Beta 3's forward array. Window closing in 20. Com said, 19. Rhea did not count with her mouth. She counted with her blood. Last boat in, Doc shouted. Hold the bite 2 heartbeats, Rhea said, which is not a measure instruments recognize, and exactly the one people do. Vesper obliged a superstition by existing where Halcyon needed her to be, and nowhere Kither did. The bite closed like a wound, learning the word scar. Silence arrived, not as absence, but as a thing earned. Rhea let herself look at the board for the first time that hour. The minutes had reset themselves into a number that meant today instead of survival. Vesper, she said into the line that had held treason and romance and now carried gratitude. You owe me the recipe for whatever you just did. Halcyon, the voice said, a smile audible. We brought a cookbook. Buy us 3 more minutes tomorrow. Rhea looked at her station, the stubbornness, the broken elegance. The children learning how to measure breath, and said the only thing anyone should ever say to a ghost that keeps time. Copy. Vesper slipped back into Theta's cold, like a thought a doctrine forgot to finish, leaving Halcyon with 3 miracles and a headache, a hole in a perfect ring, a convoy through an impossible window, and numbers that wanted to be a religion. Commander Rhea Salas stood over the ops table and let the first rush of survival drain enough to make discipline possible, then replayed the bite frame by frame until the team could taste its timing. Sensors parsed the wake with reverence, engineering with appetite. The Kither envoy missed his hour and returned 2 minutes late with a tone that confessed he had never practiced improvisation, promising protective stewardship, as if the word protect had not learned other meanings under sieges. Rhea muted the broadcast and looked at the faces she trusted to argue her into clarity. We have proof of concept, she said, voice flat on purpose. Now we neigh. The tight beam arrived on the line. Halcyon had learned to forgive for being old. A needle-thin whisper laced through a cable the station's architects might have intended for poetry. Halcyon Vesper, the voice said, calm enough to lend the room a steady pulse. Sending the phantom doctrine field notes, not gospel. Use what insults physics most. We can set a second window tomorrow, but their tracking will adapt. We'll need decoys, noise discipline, and the courage not to shoot when proud. Rhea nodded. It comes. Packets unfolded across the ops, displays like disciplined fireworks. Heat management regimes that made radiators behave like misers. Urn geometries designed to look like bad math from certain angles. Hull coatings tuned to prey on Kither assumptions about how light feels when it leaves metal. Angie from maintenance, who hated magic on principle and loved difficult truth, whistled once. It's mean, she said with approval. I like mean. The plan grew like muscle around bone. Combs would leak the skeleton of a fake convoy briefing on bands. The Kither monitored out of habit. Just enough cadence to tickle doctrine, not enough substance to insult intelligence. 3 dummy barges would be towed into the ring at points. The Kither's own patrol patterns marked as likely human behavior, their power signatures built to taste like overworked life support and dirty reaction mass. The refugee girders, thousands of tons of quiet desperation, would shift 3 degrees at a mark, a move no sensor analyst would attribute to guile, and therefore perfect. Vesper would be the hand that forced the eye, a single insult of blue at an angle engineered to make Beta 3 and Gamma 6 flex into a pocket. Batteries would count to 11, and then keep counting. Every turret chief wrote, weapons safe unless ordered otherwise, in letters large enough to shame impulse. Rhea made the rounds because systems obey better when asked by the person who will accept blame. She talked to Doc 12 about the stupidity of haste dressed as courage, to life support about buying 3 minutes of pressurization margin without stealing from lungs, to the refugee deck about a game called Hold the Rail that would continue until someone said, done, and not before. She took Len's question seriously when he asked if ghosts could get tired. Only when we stop feeding them minutes, she said. He squinted up at the starboard view and chose a big indifferent star to hate. Then we won't, he said, which is how children sign contracts the universe begrudgingly respects. The Kither, annoyed at their own delay, returned to schedule with doubled patrol sweeps and a new phrase, orderly inspection, that convinced no one. TAC watched their arcs tighten and said what Doctrine was thinking. They're tuning to our debris lane. Next time costs blood. Rhea nodded. Blood had been costed since day 2. Then we spend lies first, she said, and felt the room settle into the quiet before rehearsal. Phantom Doctrine, version 1, printed in Halcyon's ink. The fake briefing went out at 1812 comes cadence. A command voice tired but careful. All the little tripping points Doctrine expects when humans try to deceive well. A supply list that added to an odd number. A call sign that had not been used since the last war. A route choice that made sense to people who wanted it to. The dummy barges crept to their stations. Power plants tuned to the particular whine of ships that have not been loved enough. Inside Halcyon, boarding queues shifted with the semi-chaos of competence. Children learned to count their breaths to 11. Med teams rehearsed triage without shame at the repetition. Outside, Kither pickets adjusted their posture. Beta 3 brought her wounded array to bear as if flinching had taught her humility. Gamma 6 drifted to Alicia's end to scent the dark, and the envoy stayed blessedly silent because Doctrine has nothing helpful to say about improvisation. At 19 o'clock station mean, Vesper reappeared as a flaw in prediction rather than a light in darkness. She did not flare. She was simply absent where models required her. Sensors reported mass light inconsistency with the precise joy of professionals encountering something they had waited to name. 10 seconds later, a point of blue lit at a place designed to insult Kither point defense. Their gunners are taught to punish certainty. Phantom Doctrine teaches you to offer it at the wrong time. Beta 3 and Gamma 6 spat light like reflexes. In the pocket their fire created, Angie's tugs shoved barge Cobalt, currently masquerading as Pensioner's Mercy sideways, at a velocity that made its restraints ask for new contracts. Batteries to count, Rhea said, and the gun crews. who have waited their whole careers to be told to be loud, obeyed by staying quiet. Vesper's 3 engines whispered once more, this time along a vector that made Kither targeting code write a bug report. The dummy barges sang the wrong song in harmony. Halcyon exhaled a line of ships in the proper order dignity demands. Oxygen first, then food, then people whose work could not be done from inside a siege. A freighter named Austerity allegedly transmitted on open band, if I wedge, I volunteer to be infrastructure, and Doc 12 said, dry as vacuum. Denied. Kither Combs wobbled. A junior officer on Gamma 6, perhaps knew enough to have sand in his boots, forgot to mute and said, they are not where we put them, which is a thing Doctrine does not enjoy hearing. Beta 3 attempted an angle that would have been brilliant if Vesper had not written a pamphlet titled Traditional Spearheads, and the people who love them, and distributed it to her helmswoman. This spear of light passed within a handful of meters of Halcyon's outer antenna field and taught 3 sensors how to smell. Their own insulation burning. Len reported 9 over the open internal line he had found. 12 other voices answered with their counts, as if the numbers themselves could be woven into armor. The bite was not a hole so much as a permission. Ships that had been pretending to be one thing admitted another. A tug that had felt useless for a month found itself crucial. A doctrine that had never been told no learned a politer word with sharper edges. Not yet. Vesper traced a boundary with one honest burn. Angie's coil tug tripped a picket's vent in a way that looked like negligence, until you read malice backwards. The medical barge threaded the gap like a pilgrim through a narrow gate. The last out was a cargo barge retrofitted with bunks and vows, its captain counting along with Len and crying quietly. At 11, window closing, Cum said, voice thinning as if threaded through needles. 20 seconds. Rhea did not count aloud. She watched Vesper choose to be seen at the exact moment the ring believed it had solved her. 3 engines drawing a line across 6 firing solutions that disagreed with each other so violently they turned to noise. The bite knitted itself into Blockade again. Silence returned the way it does when effort has the decency to leave. Tight beam, tomorrow. Window 2 minutes. They're learning. So will we. Teach your tugs a new lie. We'll bring a new truth. Rhea looked at the board, the minutes now arranged in a shape that might be called hope if you were irresponsible, and said, copy. We're writing faster than we thought. Angie, rolling her shoulders like a person who has spent courage and would like more, added, and bring bolts, which is doctrine in one language and prayer in another. By the second window, both sides had learned, which is when wars start telling the truth. Kither patrols no longer coasted on Doctrine's muscle memory. Gamma 6 flew on a shorter leash. Beta 3's wounded array were a clever bandage of auxiliary emitters. And the Envoy's velvet grammar introduced a new phrase. Humanitarian accession. That tasted like paperwork soaked in vinegar. Inside Halcyon, minutes became a synchronized sport. Combs rehearsed whispers until cadence turned to craft. Doc 12 organized chaos into lanes. Life support stole pressure from empty spaces and smuggled it into lungs. The refugee girders shifted their mass at rehearsal marks. With the dignity of a choir that has found Vesper's tight beam, arrived with fewer apologies than last time and a payload heavier in math. Their tracking has adapted, the voice said, still calm, now edged with the satisfaction of a teacher facing a smart class. They're biasing toward our decoy cadence. We changed the song. Phantom Doctrine V2. Thermal lace. We will sweat in patterns that argue with their assumptions about heat dissipation. Your dummy barges must drift off tempo, not just off axis. Batteries hold as before. New danger. Gamma 6 has learned to faint. Do not bite when pride invites. Rhea read the recipe twice, then looked at engineering. Can you make us misbehave politely? We have always been impolite to thermodynamics. OOD said, grinning. Now we'll be artistic. Thermal lace turned the station into a loom. Radiator panels, once honest sheets of heat confession blinked patterns Halcyon's successors would turn into fraternity tests. Short on one spoke, long on another, a heartbeat on a third. The dummy barges became bad actors. Their power plants desynchronized with their nav beacons by millisecond lies. Comms drafted a whisper that sounded like a commander who had slept 4 hours and believed bodies could be 2 places at once. The refugee girders shifted weight at lopsided intervals, promising from a sensor perspective a convoy that had skipped breakfast. Rhea walked the decks and let people see her count to 11 with her fingers. Len told her he could reach 12 now, and she pretended to be impressed as if she had not practiced to 13 for luck. Kither Doctrine, annoyed at having to work, demonstrated why it had conquered 6 systems. Pickets vectored in concentric shells that looked like geometry being smug. Beta 3 presented an engine edge as bait. Gamma 6 executed a shallow dive toward the debris lane with the careless grace of a predator, not quite bored, and the Envoy flooded local bands with coordination advisories that pretended to be public safety. Rhea muted the theater and watched the math. Pride is a sensor, she reminded herself, and ours must be saved. At 1902 Station Mean, Vesper emerged as a lace of negatives rather than a streak of blue. Sensors called it radiator misdirection. The stealth ship sweated heat along edges at intervals too pretty to be accidental, and too inconsistent to be useful to Doctrine. Kither tracking suites, hungry for cadence, ate the wrong melody and swiveled toward the dummy barges with the offended energy of professionals being mocked. Batteries to count, Rhea said, and the gun crews became statues. 11, 12, 13. The first decoy burned just enough to make a lie feel earned. Beta 3's point defense stitched a blistering net across vacuum. In the pocket that net created, Vesper exhaled a real burn perfectly aligned with Halcyon's misbehavior. And Angie's tugs shoved Barge Cobalt's sister-old account into a slot that had not existed until Doctrine opened its mouth to correct someone and forgot to close it. Doc 12 handed oxygen out as if it were a prize. Life support cheered in reduced oxygen. The medical barge threaded through again, this time trailing a filament of drones that carried blood and antibiotics like smugglers. Deliver grace. Gamma 6 fainted. A sharp roll and a fake opening as pretty as a trap. Tax breath hitched. Pride wiggled its fingers like a lousy magician. Rhea kept batteries safe and heard, distantly, the sound of 3 gun captains unclenching their fists on triggers. Vesper declined the invitation with the manners of a queen at the wrong party and lit, where a Kither lieutenant had written unlikely on his internal report. They're angry, Con said, because sometimes you can hear Doctrine pant. Good, Rhea said. Angry Doctrine is sloppy. Sloppy did not mean safe. A Kither spear scraped Halcyon's outer truss and taught steel how to scream. 3 sensor masts went blind at once. For a terrifying heartbeat, the board strobed amber across essential systems, then settled as redundancies did the work they were bought for. Len counted out loud over the open internal line again. 7, 8, 9, and a dozen adult voices followed because children conduct better than clocks. The last freighter through this time was a brick with an honest name, Labor. Its captain declared, for the record, I am too heavy and too stubborn. And Angie answered, for the record, we have the same religion. Vesper drew the boundary with a single, odd-sounding burn, as if to say, we are done here. And Doctrine, insulted, overshot the exit, like a rider kicking a horse that had already decided the race. The window snapped closed with a sound sensors would later describe as nothing, and the Envoy returned to his hour 3 minutes late with a statement about regrettable incidents that made a maintenance apprentice throw a wrench gently at a speaker and then apologize because tools are friends. Halcyon floated in the after silence and took stock. Oxygen up, calories up, medicine enough for triage that isn't merely sorting the doomed from the possible. Losses. 3 masts. 1 tug scraped to honest metal. A bolt sheared off a door. Len liked to stand behind when he pretended to be tall. Gains. A doctrine learning fear. A playbook learning revisions, a station learning it can write. Type beam, Vesper again, now with fatigue around the vowels. Window tomorrow, 90 seconds, the voice said. They are adapting faster. We have 1 more trick, and then we require politics. Prepare your mouthpieces. Rhea looked at the Envoy's velvet grammar, fossilizing on the screen, and felt something like a grin sharpen into strategy. We have a few mouths, she said, and a city to feed with them. 90 seconds is not a window, it is a dare. Vesper's type beam arrived with a new weight in the vowels, and no pretense that cleverness would continue to beat mass forever. They're converging on our lace, the voice said. Gamma 6 is running predictive models with live fire. We have one more maneuver before this stops being a problem for physics and becomes one for politics. We will open a 90-second corridor. After that, we need a microphone and an audience. Rhea Solace looked at the ops floor, the faces that had counted to 11 until numbers lost their edges, and said, "Copy. We'll treat seconds like minutes and words like..." Phantom Doctrine V3 was less an algorithm and more a confession. Vesper would burn ugly shallow, brutish maneuvers that risked being seen in order to make the Kither believe pride had forced an error. Halcyon would throw a single transport through, not because one barge meant victory, but because one barge packed with the right mouths could change the battle's grammar. Combs drafted a message that had teeth but didn't gnash them. A public address to the ring, to the occupied worlds listening for precedent, to the Kitha crews listening for permission to be tired. Rhea selected the cargo, a legal attach with a gift for speaking quietly, a medic whose triage reports had gone viral off-station, two civic leaders who had learned to talk to cameras without thinking they were mirrors. Len asked if children were allowed to be part of politics. Every time, Rhea said. He nodded solemnly and returned to practicing 12. Kither Doctrine, sensing a last trick, tightened into elegance. Pickets nested like parentheses. Beta 3 rotated into a stance that made a spear of her radiators. Gamma 6 fainted twice in 20 seconds just to brag, and the envoy reappeared with a tone that mistook exhaustion for authority. "Unlawful transmissions will be treated as war acts," he said. Rhea muted him and considered whether laws should be allowed to grow in vacuums without sun. At 1901, Vesper chose to be honest about being a target. She lit like a knife, not a ghost, a blue that wrote rude graffiti across Kither targeting suites. Sensors reported 6 locks within a heartbeat, then 3 as Doctrine argued with itself. Vesper snapped into a vector that begged to be punished. Halcyon did not blink. 90, Combs breathed. "Go," Rhea said. The transport was called Parley because either fate has a sense of humor or dockmasters do. She launched heavy with people who could rearrange a room and a transmitter that could cut through etiquette. Vesper dragged Beta 3's gaze aside like a stagehand yanking curtains. Gamma 6 tried a new trick, spoofing a decoy signal onto Parley's wake, and Tactical calmly fed the spoof back into the debris lane, where it scandalized 2 minds into nobility and cleared a path a little wider than hope. 60, Combs said, which sounds like a knife when you spread it across a room. Parley crossed the bite, with 10 seconds spent on gratitude and 80 on terror. Once free of the ring, she banked hard and lit her own transmitter not at Halcyon, but at the Kithernet, a frequency that Doctrine listens to only to correct. The legal attach spoke first, voice a scalpel, to Kither crews who will have to write reports. "Here are 3 sentences you may use without losing honor." She listed them calmly, built to satisfy both truth and face. The medic spoke next to occupied worlds. "Your triage codes work under siege. Here is how we made oxygen behave with duct tape and discipline. Here are the standards we will hold you to when this ends." The civic leaders spoke last, not to Doctrine, but to culture. A blockade is an architecture of hunger. Architects can change their plans. The envoy tried to cut the feed and discovered that public channels have teeth when used for public goods. Vesper, now fully visible because lies had finished their usefulness, rolled above Parley and presented her flank to Gamma 6 with the casual contempt of a veteran unwilling to rehearse a younger opponent's fantasies. 30, Combs said, and Rhea found herself counting along with Len without resenting it. 20. Angie, whose hands smelled faintly of scorched paint and courage, whispered to the ops table, "Hold your bolts," which is technically nonsense and practically profound. At 10 seconds, Vesper executed the maneuver she had warned would be the last. A bloom of heat dumped into a pattern that ate Kither predictive code alive. Beta 3's spear overshot by a contemptible margin. Gamma 6's feint ran into an exit that was no longer there. Parley cut her transmitter and shoved acceleration into the hole etiquette had left. "Window closed," Combs said, then softer, awed. "They can't pretend they didn't hear us." Silence did not fall so much as step back and let thought work. The Kither did not fire for an entire hour. Doctrine convened itself somewhere private and tried to square pride with practicality. Inside Halcyon, the board felt different. Not because numbers had stopped being tyrants, but because words had joined them on the shelf where tools live. Rhea authorized a broad beam, not swagger, just proof of life, and closed with a line that sounded accidental and was not. We will use the next window for cargo only. Your crews are invited to stand down for 60 seconds of professional courtesy. We will measure who chooses to be tired. At 21 o'clock, for the first time in a month, one Kither cruiser rotated her radiators to face the planet and not the station for 1 exact minute. Beta 3 did not. Gamma 6 twitched and pretended he had meant to stretch. Parley, now distant, relayed one last image back through Vesper's needle, a shot of the ring from outside. Sunrise painting hulls the same color regardless of flag. The ops floor stood very still, as if loud gratitude might break the spell. Tight beam, Vesper, quieter. We're at fuel margins for cleverness. Tomorrow's window, logistics only. After that, we either get a delegation or a lesson. Prepare for both. Rhea rubbed her eyes and smiled without humor. We have a pen and a wrench, she said. We'll write, or we'll fix. Len, somewhere in the maze of rails and promises, announced, I can do 13, and adults across the station decided to learn it. Silence, when earned, becomes a tool. Halcyon spent a whole rotation using it to build habit out of hope. The 90-second window became 90 for cargo only. Oxygen, protein, antibiotics, radiator seals. A crate of children's books that arrived because someone downwell refused to believe triage shouldn't include stories. Kither Doctrine observed with its jaws clenched. One cruiser rotated radiators away for exactly 60 seconds at each window, as if to prove it could be tired without losing face. Beta 3 stayed knife-edged and resentful. Gamma 6 twitched like a muscle, learning a new sport. Vesper hovered near fuel margins and manners, her tight beams shorter, her math still rude, her hull now admitted to be a shape in their sky rather than a sup. At 10 o'clock station mean, the envoy appeared not as velvet, but as fabric worn thin. A delegation will approach under white lights for parley, he said, and the word choice made the ops floor glance at each other with the indecorous pleasure of a pun answered by history. Any hostile action will avoid. Rhea muted the rest because there are only so many clauses a morning can bear. We do this on our terms, she said. We keep guns cold and cameras warm. We speak into the record we made last night. The delegation's shuttle came patterned like apology lights bright. Heat honest, vector slow. Halcyon extended a docking arm that had been re-welded twice by people who took pride personally and attached with a ceremony that refused to be punked. The docking bay smelled like disinfectant and nerves. Rhea greeted the Kither with a translator that did not flatter vowels and a table that had room for pens. The Kither lead wore the kind of thin armor that passes for costume at parades. The junior behind him had the cataloging glance of a professional learning faster than doctrine likes. We are here to discuss conditions, the lead said. We are here to discuss outcomes, Rhea replied, and the rules of engagement shifted a centimeter toward honesty. Negotiations are battles where weapons are words and logistics is patience. Rhea let the legal attach open with an inventory of facts cargo amounts. Oxygen levels. The hour Beta 3 rotated radiators toward sunrise. She let the medic follow with triage outcomes, measurable by anyone with a pulse and a pencil. The civic leaders spoke briefly about architecture and hunger. The Kither lead responded with phrases like regional stabilization and compliance corridors. And every time he said stability, Rhea wrote food on her pad, large enough for the junior to notice. Vesper remained outside the viewport like a punctuation-marked doctrine hadn't learned to diagram. Her tight beam arrived mid-session with a single line. Guns remain safe unless fired upon. Pattern white light holds. Record everything. Rhea slid the slate face down and smiled politely at the Kither lead, who mistook composure for agreement and tried inspection teams. The junior flinched and then didn't. Rhea pressed the advantage by offering something doctrine had not prepped a line for, a schedule of public windows co-monitored by neutral stations. White light only, cargo manifests public and enforced by embarrassment. Call it professional courtesy, she said. The lead reached for pride and found it slippery. The junior cleared his throat and very carefully asked, what would we get in return? A siege that ends before history names it, the legal attach said, gentle and lethal. Outside, at 13 o'clock, the ring rotated 1 degree out of formation, an adjustment nobody ordered and everyone felt. Beta 3 did not change posture. Gamma 6 drifted nearer sunrise, pretending orbit mechanics demanded it. Vesper did nothing dramatic and terrified everyone anyway. Inside, the negotiation found the necessary theater. The Kither lead demanded inspection authority. Rhea offered transparent logistics. He asked for a guarantee that no warship would use a window. At that, Rhea gestured toward the viewport with the boredom of someone who has learned new definitions. That is a ship keeping its promise, she said. We don't call that war. The junior watched her as if watching might become a profession. We could propose a 30-day maintenance posture, he said carefully to his superior. White light windows enforced by sensors on both sides. No offensive maneuvers. Relief cargo prioritized, then risked a glance at Rhea and added, with a review at dawn. The lead looked annoyed at dawn being invoked, as if it belonged to anyone. Rhea resisted the urge to congratulate someone else's courage. They broke for an hour to let Doctrine refile its paperwork, which is also called face. During the pause, Halcyon ran a window by ritual. Cargo out. No heroics. Oxygen in. The children's books shelved by someone who had never seen a shelf used for joy. A single Kither cruiser Delta II, unnoticed, until now turned her running lights a fraction warmer for exactly 60 seconds. Combs marked it in the log, because manners deserve minutes. When they reconvened, the Kither lead announced, with the ceremonial reluctance of a man finding compromise where he keeps his trophies, that the Dominion would accept a 30-day maintenance posture pending higher approval, that white light windows would be respected, that any warship breaching would end the experiment, and that a joint statement would be issued using the phrase mutual de-escalation so that headlines could eat without choking. Rhea nodded once and said, we'll sign where our people can read it. Tight beam, final of the day. Vesper, fuel at dignity margin. We can hold posture, cloak warm, guns cold. If they fire, we write chapter 2. If they don't, we go home and pretend politics worked. Rhea stood at the viewport long after the delegates left, watching a ring decide whether it preferred obedience to doctrine or relief to pride. Len appeared at her elbow without permission, which is a rank children hold. Is it over? He asked. Nothing ends, Rhea said, but sometimes things stop being stupid. He considered this and nodded. Professional. I can do 14, he reported. She smiled at the ring and thought that might be enough. Dawn on Halcyon is a courtesy light rolled across the planet below and painted the blockade the same color regardless of flag. The 30-day maintenance posture was not yet ratified by whoever Doctrine reports to. But day one began with white lights and a silence that tasted like professionalism. Vesper held station just outside in politeness. Cloak warm, guns asleep, fuel at dignity margin. Her tight beam came at 5 o'clock with only coordinates and a line that would become a proverb. Windows can be treaties if both sides are tired. Rhea Solace ran fingers along the ops rail until the habit of worry smoothed. Doc 12's boards, once a list of rationed panic, showed cargo in without editorial. Life support plotted pressures like poets' plot lines when they decide tea at 9 o'clock. The Kither envoy delivered the first joint statement with the suspicion of a man who expects his own words to bite him later. It read like a press release and felt like stealing back a breath. White light windows at noon and midnight. Relief cargo. Prioritized. No offensive maneuvers. Mutual de-escalation posture under review. The junior from yesterday stood half a step behind. Eyes forward, career newly perilous. Reassigned with the pen the council had saved for weddings. Because sometimes you decide a document will be beautiful, even if the ink fights you. Windows make habits, and habits make peace plausible. At noon, cargo came and went without adjectives. Parley returned with an empty transmitter and a full manifest. Delta II rotated her radiators toward sunrise for 60 seconds without being asked, and Beta 3 did not, which is how you know Pride has a circulatory system. On the refugee girders, Len organized a count by rows and discovered that when 300 people count to 14 together, the room sounds like a new kind of engine. In maintenance, Angie installed sensor masts as if the universe had always intended for them to be there. In med, The triage board lost its black column for immediate, and nobody announced it because miracles should be quiet enough to hear. At 18 o'clock, Doctrine tried one last flex gamma 6, drifted uncomfortably close to a window's edge with the plausible curiosity of a cat, and found itself recorded from 6 angles and 3 jurisdictions. Comms pushed the footage to every occupied station with a caption written in bureaucrat. Observed deviation. Professional courtesy maintained. The clip trended for 12 hours, which is how long it takes shame to do arithmetic. Dawn, the next day, carried a message Doctrine didn't draft. Beta 3 rotated her radiators to the planet for exactly 60 seconds, and then, as if discovering a new muscle, did it again 3 hours later for 20. No one on Halcyon clapped out loud. Operations let itself breathe in a rhythm that resembled trust. Vesper's tight beam came as a farewell that refused trauma. We are at fuel end. Our ghosting becomes a shadow if we stay. Doctrine has a choice. You have your minutes back. If they turn the lights red, we will run the cookbook again with less poetry. If they keep them white, we will go home and pretend politics worked until it does. Rhea asked. Ops for the line to be recorded, and spoke like a person who has counted to more numbers than war imagines. Vesper, Halcyon, we held breath. You made windows. The board is back to days. We will spend them like civilized people. If the ring forgets, we remember your recipes and our bolts. Safe burn. The reply was one word thinner than Doctrine likes. Copy. The ghost left like a lesson learned, no flair, no parade, a small subtraction from the dark that felt like someone removing a hand from a shoulder after making sure the person could stand. The Kither did not celebrate. Doctrine does not toast losses, and the junior who had asked smart questions likely spent the morning filing reports that tried to keep his superior's name out of history. Halcyon celebrated without being seen. Vents ran a degree warmer. The kitchen added sugar to tea. Doc 12 put a crate of children's books in the atrium and did not bolt it down. Life support threw out the emergency chart called If and pinned up the one called When. Rhea walked the maintenance catwalk at shift's end because stations are best understood from where they creak. She watched white light windows open and close with the automated boredom good systems deserve. She paused where the first spear had scraped the truss and touched the weld line Angie had made as if it were a scar on a friend's arm, which it was. Len appeared at her elbow as though promoted to shadow. Can I stop counting? He asked. You can count different things, she said. Ships in, days without stupid, sunrises where nobody pretends not to see them. On the last page of the day, the envoy returned with a statement that almost achieved humility. Maintenance posture extended pending central review, he said. We acknowledge professional conduct from Halcyon Station. He did not say thank you. He did not need to. The ring's formation loosened by a fraction that made engineers nod. A rumor traveled faster than tight beams. 3 Dominion worlds had watched the footage and asked, in polite committee language, why Doctrine's pride cost so much oxygen. The story did not end. It rotated. But Dawn, the one everyone had promised in the title and doubted in the bones, finally broke the ring in the only way that matters, by teaching it a better shape. Vesper's cookbook got copied, greased, and stained. Phantom Doctrine turned from a rumor into a chapter in manuals, with a footnote that read, in a pinch, count to 11. When minutes become windows, spend them on breath. Rhea stood in the atrium, while children argued about shelves and vows, and signed a requisition that replaced the relief board's minutes with a calendar made of days. We'll keep this one, she said to nobody and to the station, and it hummed assent like a home.